All right. So on that, let's go ahead and I'm going to dive into a wonderful community comment and we'll get to as many as we can. This one is coming from Ventus. Hopefully, I'm not butchering your name. Ventus says, I see the homogenization more like archetypes. With the Paladin update, it flows like Gunbreaker with a more double 1 minute rotation, where the Warrior and Dark have a long build-up within its rotation. But even through these two groups, they have a similar archetype of combat flow. Paladin and Gunbreaker don't feel the same, while Warrior and Dark feel less similar now, to me, than they did in the past. I think the design of these archetypes, while still letting these classes have their identity, is the perfect balance. Well, balance. Melee caster DPS archetypes, for selfish or not, helps differentiate each of the jobs and their roles. And for healers, I think shield and regen, or what I would say is proactive and reactive healers, works as a whole. But Astrologian feels weird since half of its identity was its flex nature. In general, Fizz range has a balance of Bard being a party-wide buff, Dancer being more of a one-target buff and area buff heals, while Machinist has the damage focus. I think that they just need to do more with the role. What I call the Archetype's X identity system is what I'm seeing can definitely work to help keep players feeling powerful, but keeps one from being head over heels better. It would just need to be refined more. And for the context of this, we were talking about the homogenization and uniqueness of jobs versus the fun or the balance of jobs. So Chris, you got any thoughts on Ventus's comment here?
So like Brian and I don't clear all the Savage. Between us, we've never done Ultimate. Between us, we've never solo cleared a deep dungeon. So like Brian and I, as far as like where the balance becomes down to those single percentages, we're not the type of player that is affected by this, because neither of us is playing at the skill level that 1% difference is because of the class and not some mistake that we made. Mm-hmm. And B, we're not gated from the content we consume based on class choice. So any amount of variety or archetype that says I'm going to have this different flavor of the same experience, a different flavor of Fizz range, the different flavor of tanking is really great. It's really great. We really enjoy it. But the moment you get into a Omega Protocol type moment, a P8S before the nerf type moment, there's still going to be a better one. And so it's not necessarily like at that very top level, you're still going to have the best one is going to get slotted. And once the best one gets slotted by the best 8 players in the world who get the first kill, it is going to make its way into the community as a whole. And you're going to have people down at the bottom that are making mistakes in their rotation saying, well, Machinist isn't welcome in this content because you have to have either the single or party-wide buffs in this example. And they're still going to exclude Machinist, even though in reality, a Machinist that plays well is going to outplay the Dancer that they ended up bringing. It doesn't matter. The meta is still going to be driven by the meta, whether or not it's logical. I think this whole comment is very, very reasonable. This idea that to get away from everybody being the same, we should give each person their own flavor, this identity, this archetype, this theme, and then they're always bringing their own take on the role as a whole with their theme. And every time you add abilities or take away abilities, you go back to their core thesis statement and you say, I want to further perpetuate the theme. So this is about lots of movement, or this is about these various type buffs to other players, or whatever each character's about. And you can further make that canon by telling that through the way that, when we have things like class and job quests, if we ever go back to that, you can describe them as that. You can have their tooltips as that. You can have the flavor text in their weapons like that, or their relics or whatever. You can really drill down and make a paladin feel like a paladin and a dark knight feel like a dark knight. That's super duper duper cool. But the moment that people are on Proto Crater and they're just getting slammed into the ground on the same mechanic over and over and over and over, you're gonna have the same issue. And you're gonna have, people are gonna pick the best one. And so then what's gonna happen is you're gonna have a bunch of people who like Machinist, but hate that they don't get invited because they don't have buffs. And the logical choice from a balance perspective is, well, we'll just give Machinist a buff. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, so they're all pretty much the same thing. Like the moment you say like, well, if people aren't bringing dancers or machinists in this mythical example I'm making up because party buffs are the best and bard's the best in whatever patch cycle, then all of a sudden you give dancer and machinist a party wide buff and they're all the same. And that's how I feel about tanks. Is I feel like as somebody that's not affected by world first prog, but like it feels like over the years they've just slowly removed more and more of their identities to the point where they can all do everything, and it takes the very cutting edge content to make any difference between them whatsoever. Otherwise they start to feel a lot alike, and it starts to feel like, oh, so you're just determining what my weapon glam looks like it doesn't, none of it matters.
So how much do you feel, and this stacks up with the increase to 100 and the additional skills that would essentially be added, as at least the pattern has been thus far? Because that's one of the things that I felt like the PvP changes really highlighted was obviously the reduction of skills. And so then you ended up having, I think, that more nuanced style where in this case, like if we're adding skills at some point, do we just have this is just that other version of that skill that operates? Yeah, it's different. It feels different. But do you see them running into a wall? Do you see a level squish happening at some point in Square Enix's future based off the current trajectory and kind of this comment?
For casual content, the more skills we have on the bar, the more the same they feel, because you're not forced to use your whole kit perfectly to navigate casual content. And so you don't really run into the differences until you get put into like a savage type situation or an ultimate type situation, where when I listen to people who are a lot better than me and know a lot more than me talk about the game, they start to note these minor differences, that the charge range difference matters, that the duration difference on a mitigation matters, that the phrasing on something being physical or magical starts to really matter, as opposed to in casual content, like when you're in a dungeon, mid is mid. It doesn't matter. Mid is mid. So as we have a large number of skills, I think it's easier for casual players to not use all of them, as opposed to if you only have 5 skills on the bar, you're going to use all 5. So I do think there is a skill bloat type component, but that's regardless of level. That would be if they kept us at 6 and we'd always just added 1, removed 1 and stayed at 6. That's just anytime you have a lot of skills, the individual skills themselves seem to not matter as much. That's why I think that Diablo 4 went with 6 skills. And people said that's because of controller. There are plenty of games out there that have more than 6 skills that are played with by controllers. That's not a controller thing. That's a balance choice, because now they can make each skill you bring incredibly impactful, because there are good skills that you're not bringing. You're not like, oh, I'll just bring all the good ones. No, you won't, because there's more than 6 good ones. So you are going to have to make a choice, and that choice is going to matter. And so like restricting the number of skills is definitely a portion of it. That doesn't mean you couldn't have identity within a large skill set. You could. You would just have to lean into it, and you would have to let balance go to the wind. If everything about Warrior was all about bloodletting and inner release and primal rend, and we were just doing that all the time, and it was just constant life leech, and like we gave up home gang for more life leech, and we were just a life leech tank, and we were just jumping around with big fell cleaves, and everything was about building up fell cleaves, build up gauge, and you sacrifice your own life to build up more gauge, and then you gain back life with your fell cleave damage, and it was just this life leech berserking where you were hungry for blood, and if you ever had to stop attacking, you would die. You're just constantly hungry. There's an element of Warrior's personality that's captured by that. There are immediately people who clear Savage that go, yeah, but you would lose. Like, we would just bring somebody who can actually survive a tank buster. So like the problem is that all classes being able to clear all content is a restriction that now means you either have to restrict the content to being something that can be cleared by any strategy, or you have to make sure that every class is capable of the winning strategy. So that's where you're at. And so like, that's why we end up in this question of like, does everybody just end up the same so that we can have content that's really, really challenging for that one method, but they're all capable of doing it? Or do we exclude people? Because there are really interesting personalities, and some personalities are not aligned with certain content. And like, there's not a right answer. There are games that are heavily personality driven. They have these massively defined archetypes. There are. and some archetypes have better outcomes by certain measures. And there are games where everybody's effectively the same, and it just comes down to player skill. You just get to choose where on that spectrum your game falls.
Yeah, and I think it's well said. I'm loving seeing all the chat going off on talking about it, because I honestly think as they add in more skills, they either have to replace the existing skills or come up with a different system. And I'm just true, like what they did with PvP, I was, if they were able to do something along those lines with PvE, they really made those jobs. Like, would you like, I guess the follow as kind of a final thought from you, like the individualized limit break, I thought brought a lot of that uniqueness to each job that exists within PvP.
Sure.
Would you want to see like the limit break system kind of evolve to maybe kind of address that personalized limit? Because at level 3, they all have their own visual style, but in terms of what they do, how they're executed, you have, your single target, you have your like line AoE, you have your healing, and then you have your like circle AoE. Like that's how the limit breaks are currently structured. Would that be a good thing to do to bring in and individualize the jobs a little bit more?
I think trying to pick one solution to get us all on the same page is what got us in this mess. Getting everybody onto 2-minute windows sounded really logical the way they explained it to a basically trained eye. There were people who predicted the problem that was with it, but it sounded like at least there was a decent line of thought in there that was at least well-intentioned. And it turned out to cause a lot of problems. And so, which, like I said, there were some people that predicted, not everybody. And so like, I think coming up with one universal solution. So I think the thing to take away from PvP is not, there's something really cool about PvP, let's export it to the rest of the game. The thing to take away from PvP is a different mode and it is played in a different way. And your job responded to that by developing a toolkit that was specific and well-designed for PvP. And so my question then is, when I'm in a hunt train and I have why can't I just have a personal limit break and there's crazy personal limit breaks going off? I know why we don't have personalized limit breaks or class-specific limit breaks in Savage or Ultimate. It'd be impossible for balance. So why don't we separate? Why don't we just draw a line and just slice it and say, open world, our classes function inherently differently. I am not learning how to AoE on a black mage in dungeons in open world anyway, because I'm not pulling like that.
Right.
So why not just give me a different tool set in the open world than I do in dungeons, and then have the dungeons become training grounds for raids and the raids training grounds for ultimates. So I have my instance skill set, I have my casual content skill set, which is maybe available, let it be available in like alliance raids. There's just 24 freaking personal limit breaks going off. It's insanity. Who cares? It's crazy content anyway. And so like you can have moments where you kind of break those rules. Exploratory zones break a lot of rules. And so like, why aren't we just, what the takeaway from PvP is literally what if every job got to play like a limited version of itself? It's Blue Mage. It's shenanigans. Every job, when it kills you, feels like, oh, that job's broken. Like it feels awesome. Every job feels awesome. Yet when you play it, it doesn't seem to be broken. Seems to be fine. And like, I love that about PvP, that I'm like, oh, that's the worst thing, man. That bard silence is the worst thing. Oh, that samurai instant one shot. That's the worst thing. Oh, that warrior, like every job's the worst thing, because every job got to be this fantastical, crazy, super stand tall pink Tonberry version of itself. And it's all so proud and so just like fully erect.
Izzy writes, if dungeons are your end game, yes, homogenization sucks in this game, but if ultimates are your end game, each job is going to feel vastly unique. That one job change can create a massive difference. And that this kind of, for me, I guess the question is that does this echo that the like Criterion dungeons kind of are a miss? Because when it comes down to dungeons themselves, like like you could end up having more of that dungeon style endgame, which right now as it exists, it ends up just being a time attack without a time attack. What do you think?
I think that saying a system is balanced because it works in the content that 90% to 99% of every server is literally not even going to attempt is a flaw with the system. So that may be true. Pride is ranked like top 20 in LoL achievements for the world globally. So like Pride knows this game at a level of intimacy that I will never know. And so like that may very well be true. But if that's the true answer to this conversation, that it is really interesting when you play at the top 1% level, that's a problem. Like, that's a huge problem, right? Like, if people say you're a dick all the time and they don't know how your wife is even married to you, and you're like, well, actually, after you spend about 1,000 hours with Brian, he's really nice. No, like, you're still a dick. Like, because most people aren't going to spend that 1,000 hours. They're not going to get there. So, like, I don't have any ability to refute or agree with the fact that ultimates may make the differences between the classes feel really distinct and amazing. My question is, how do we back out and make them feel different in dungeons as well?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to break ultimates. I think that's awesome that those are there, and I think that's really important. And so that's why I hesitate to say, like, well, let's take some element of PvP and inject it into PvE. That's going to break things way downstream from me. There are going to be people that are surviving on water further downstream that I don't know about, and they're going to get impacted by this. So my question is, like, how do we go in and maybe make dungeons more interesting? And I thought Criterion Variant was going to help breathe some life into that, and it still might.
It might. With 6.4, you know, that's where they are going to pick that up and continue that system. And so this will be 6.4 will be that opportunity from feedback of the original Criterion and building that into this next iteration of Criterion, because we knew they were taking 6.3 off to focus in on, you know, Deep Dungeon and the other, you know, revamping and the other like story dungeons. And so ultimately 6.4 is where they're like picking back up. And, you know, it's been 8 months. So they've had ideally some time to be able to hear the feedback and then start to implement that. So I really hope so, because I think Criterion could be a really good piece of content for a lot of people at its core. So
that's my question. How do we make it fun for everybody else ideally without having to displace the ultimate people? Like, I don't want them to lose their fun, so I have mine. I believe we live in a world where it's not a finite amount of fun. And it's like, you know what? There's too many of us. We're just going to go take the fun from the ultimate. Don't do that. Let them have their fun. And so maybe there are additional class restrictions for ultimate that make it an interesting problem to solve. And then there are less class restrictions in dungeons so that we get access to a version of our skills that are just a little bit too much shenanigans. Limit breaks really don't mean a lot to me in dungeons. And so maybe that's a chance for those to work a little bit differently. Because limit breaks really aren't necessary in dungeons. And so maybe we are on a personal limit break. Maybe we do only in dungeons, but when you go to 8-man content, trials, raids, when you go to full party, you move to a shared limit break. I don't know. Maybe limit break's the answer. Maybe it's not. But like, I do think we're at a point where, like, definitely when I'm doing open world stuff, tribals, hunts, any of that, it definitely feels like at that point, my class should function a little more completely. Making a healer feel like a healer in the open world feels weird. Like, you know, in PvP they slap. Like, let's let them slap.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on that note, I see a lot of really great comments flowing in on live chat. So I think that's the conversation that we definitely need to continue on into the show next week. So be sure, if you're watching this is a VOD in the archive, or is this is the highlight, drop those comments that you guys want and your points, and we can pull them up like we did with Ventus here. We've been collecting the various comments. I literally have, I think, probably about 20 or 30 comments that we might end up just doing a show that's literally just going through all of everybody's comments, but I've been enjoying bringing those into the rotation for the shows going forward. So guys, thank you so much for being here. Like, sub, share, all of that great stuff helps out these videos, these VODs, all that stuff. And I hope that you guys all have a fantastic day.